AI and data strategies, Salesforce being the best software company of 2025, and a deep dive into the Matrix ERP case study. Those are just a few of the topics we're going to cover here in episode 212 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control from Matrix on.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 212. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And this is Transformation Ground Control, the podcast that has everything to do with digital strategy. It's a tech agnostic view of the strategy, people, process, and technology aspects of digital transformation. You can find episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting and produced by Major Tom Productions. And joining me as our co-host, as always, is Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for today's episode.
Yeah, I'm really excited too. We're gonna dive into AI. I feel like we do most episodes, but it just never gets old. It never gets old or less exciting talking about AI just because it is such a fun topic. We're gonna get into AI and data strategies later in the show. We're gonna have Khalid Morris on the show, who's a director here at Third Stage Consulting, and he sort of specializes in and has written a book about AI and data strategy. So we're going to chat about that later in the show. But before we get to that, we're going to get into some social media questions that we've received. We're going to talk about a couple articles and newsworthy topics related to Salesforce. One being the Salesforce just secured the title of Best Software Company for 2025. And then we're also going to talk about how Salesforce just launched their agent exchange. And then we'll get to the interview with Khalid talking about AI and data strategy after that. And then later in the show, in the third major segment of the show, we'll talk about the $150 million Matrix ERP project that's happening right now in the UK. And we're going to talk about some of the early red signs and red flags, not red signs. I meant to say red flags. We'll talk about some of the early red flags that we're seeing in that project and some of the data points that suggest that this project might be in trouble already. And we're going to do that in the context of a case study to really understand what causes risk to develop in a project and what causes some of the complexities in digital transformation. So we'll get to that case study here later in the show. But before we do that, what social media questions have we gotten here recently, Darian?
Yeah, I want to get your reaction to this comment to start. The comment is, one problem for smaller specialized consulting firms in the B2G space is that government customers have a stricter RFP requirements and often only accept offers from big consulting firms as a way to ensure compliance and reliability. And then they say in parentheses, big firms with long history are less likely to fail mid-project. And they say this creates a significant barrier for smaller firms trying to break into the market as they may not have the same level of resources or established reputation as their large counterparts. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's the person is touching on a true perception in the market. I mean, that is something that people perceive to be true, that, big consulting firms aren't going to fail mid-project, although I totally disagree. I don't think that's true at all, but that is the perception that, if you hire a big consulting firm, it's somehow safer. It's somehow a more, it's a known commodity. A lot of times the software or the larger consulting companies can lowball their estimates. They can come in at a lower cost because they've got so many resources on a project that they can afford to take a hit on their margins. So there's a lot of things like that lead governments to falsely think that big consulting firms, big well-known brand name consulting firms are going to be somehow safer. But the reality is, I don't think that's true at all. I think some of the smaller providers can provide better service, better value, certainly at a lower cost. But I almost feel like sometimes with government entities as well as any sort of big, massive multinational company tends to think this way too. It's almost like they're so risk adverse that they actually are increasing their risk by thinking that they're being risk adverse by hiring, a big brand name. It's sort of like the saying that no one ever got fired for hiring IBM, no one ever got fired for hiring Accenture, or insert big name here. And the only problem with that is I can name lots of people that got fired after hiring one of those firms, but there's still this false perception that it's somehow safer. So I don't know. I think you have to find the right balance. They certainly have a role. Those big consulting firms do have a role and a place in the market. But I think it's when companies just completely outsource to them or completely defer to them, that's where it gets real dangerous and unhealthy. And that's where you get these big budgets that spiral out of control, these big projects that take way too long and become big money pits. So I think that comment was that from one of my TikToks, one of the TikToks where I'm talking about the big consulting firms getting questioned by the.
Yeah, it was it was not from TikTok, it was from YouTube, but from that
Okay.
same video of big consulting firms.
Yeah. Yeah. There's if you go to my TikTok, I have a couple videos pinned at the top at the time we're recording this podcast anyway. There's a couple pinned at the top where I sort of call into question the value of big consulting firms, and it's generated a ton of comments on there. So if you want to be part of that conversation, especially on TikTok, people are pretty chatty on TikTok. So there's a lot of good conversation happening there, and it's related to like the government of Saudi Arabia, or actually not the government technically, it's the wealth fund, the organization that basically invests in all the big companies in Saudi Arabia. They've banned PwC from doing any consulting work for any of those 100 companies for the next year. So I posted a video about that, and then I got a ton of comments on the value or lack thereof of these big consulting firms, and it's really interesting to read through some of those comments. So if you are on TikTok, I encourage you to go check out that video and join that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next question today is actually kind of like 3 questions in one comment. So bear with me here as I kind of explain it. The first one is, who should be spending the most amount of time doing the administrative and data entry portion of tasks in ERP and SAP systems in a large manufacturing plant? The second question is, also on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is having a minimum of 15 years mechanical experience working on machinery, tools, parts, maintenance, in addition to ERP and SAP experience? And then the last question to go with this is, do you think engineers should learn ERP and SAP software on the job as well? So I know there's a lot to break down there, but I'll let you kind of do it how you want.
Yeah, let me try and remember them all. So the first part about who should be entering data, was that what it was? Who should be entering data in the system?
Yes, spending the most amount of time doing the administrative and data entry portion.
Yeah, well, I think long term the answer to that is probably AI. I mean, obviously, if you can get an AI agent or something like that to handle a lot of that, depending, I don't know what specific data entry this person's talking about, but some of that could be, as far as data entry or data or maintenance of the system, some of that could be automated. But it depends on how the organization is structured, to be honest. I mean, sometimes it's the IT department, sometimes it's the business owners. Sometimes it's a combination of both. So the key, though, is to have clarity around who does it. I don't think it's as important to have like a right answer as it is just to have an answer and have some clarity around it. As far as the question about, is it helpful to have the sort of on the job experience along with an understanding of ERP or SAP, I think that's a super powerful combination. You're just going to have a certain amount of credibility from a business perspective that most IT types aren't going to have. So the fact that you've actually done the work and that have been on the shop floor and doing some of the maintenance, and I'm not sure what exactly this person's role is, but whatever that experience is, that is arguably even more important than the technical experience. The technical stuff's a lot easier to learn, in my opinion, than it is to learn how, a shop floor works or how manufacturing processes work, that sort of thing. So if you understand that, that's such a strong foundation to build on with technical knowledge on top of that. And then what was the last question? I don't remember the third part.
Do you think engineers should learn ERP and SAP software on the job?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you have the opportunity to, I'd say absolutely. Any ERP system. I mean, SAP is great because if you learn SAP, there's just so much opportunity for that. So many big companies are using SAP. for as long as SAP is the kind of the reigning champion in the ERP space as far as having the biggest market share of these big companies, there's going to be a lot of career opportunities that go along with that. So I think any opportunity to learn SAP or any other well-known ERP system is going to help you in your career, especially if you have got that business foundation as well. I'm a big fan of the combination, the hybrid knowledge bases of not being too technical, but being technical enough with a really strong business foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. Some great questions from our social media and from your personal social media. And I mean, we encourage you, if you want to join into the conversation or you have any questions, make sure you're commenting anywhere on Eric's or Third Stage social media so we can answer those questions and respond to any comments or questions that you have.
Yeah, great.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get into the first newsworthy article of the day. And the theme, I guess, today for newsworthy articles, you could say, is all about Salesforce. So the first one is about how Salesforce just secured the title of Best Software Company for 2025, beating out major players like Google and Microsoft. This ranking comes from G2, a leading software review site, which based its decision on real user reviews. So it's not just some board that voted. It was reviews that they have seen. Now, what makes this interesting is that Salesforce has been aggressively expanding beyond CRM with their push into AI-driven automation, their new agent exchange marketplace, and deeper industry-specific solutions. They're clearly positioning themselves as more than just a sales tool at this point. So with this G2 saying they're beating out Google and Microsoft, which are two giants in the AI and cloud computing space, says a lot about how Salesforce, I guess, could be resonating with customers at the moment. But Eric, what does this mean for Salesforce? I guess, do you think they are actually the best software company, or is this more of a reflection of their loyal user base and strong brand presence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know why I just thought this, but I was thinking when I was growing up, I feel like I should have been on a debate team, because I feel like you could give me any software vendor and I could make a strong argument for why that's the best system out there in the world. Or I could also give you the counter to that, which is why it's the worst software in the world. So I tend to look at things from both sides. And that's part of the beauty of being tech agnostic and independent as our team is and as our company is. But to answer the question, I mean, there are some compelling arguments for why Salesforce might be one of the better, if not the best, software vendors out there. The one that comes to mind, in my opinion, is obviously the customer reviews and what customers have to say about Salesforce. I think that's super important. And I do agree that Salesforce seems to have a more positive or a more favorable perception in the market than most vendors. I mean, you look at companies like SAP, for example, I think has an extremely negative perception in the market, but they're SAP and they can kind of get away with it. I don't think they will be able to long term, but in the short term, at least in the intermediate term, they're able to counter that negative public perception based on the fact that, there aren't a lot of options for these big companies that are using SAP. But Salesforce is a little bit different, because I think we don't really hear people talk badly about Salesforce. I mean, there's troubled Salesforce implementations out there, just like any vendor is going to have, but I think people tend to have a more favorable perception. I think a lot of it is because, in my opinion, it is a more flexible product than a lot of the other systems in the market. And also because you've got this whole platform concept where it's not just about Salesforce as a CRM tool. It's about all the other third-party apps that you can put together within the Salesforce platform. So like Rootstock, for example, is a manufacturing system built on the Salesforce platform. So I think people like the fact that you kind of get the best of both worlds. It's sort of feels like an ERP-ish sort of system, not because Salesforce is an ERP system, but because the Salesforce platform gives you all these different apps that could be pulled together to create more of an ERP experience without the rigidity of it. So I think that's a big thing, is just the fact that it's a fairly flexible product. The platform gives you a lot of options to choose from. And I think people like options. And on the counter, not to make this about Salesforce versus SAP, but if I kind of look at the flip side of what vendors can do to really piss off their customers, it's to not give them options and make them feel trapped. And that's exactly the strategy of SAP, and even Microsoft is doing it to some degree. So these vendors, I think there's a direct correlation between the vendors that give customers options and give them flexibility and the ability to make their own decisions on how they deploy technology or don't, those are the vendors that people seem to like. People don't seem to like the vendors that are forcing customers to do things like SAP and Microsoft, and I can name a few others as well, but those are the two big names. So yeah, I think there's a good justification for why Salesforce might be one of the better enterprise tech companies in the space, and certainly one of the most successful financially too.
Yeah, absolutely. And to get on to your other side, I guess, of the debate, on the flip side, what are the biggest risks that customers would have with Salesforce?
I think the biggest risk is the fact that it can be easy to fall into a trap of overcomplicating your tech stack. Sometimes, the flexibility of a platform and the number of options you have within that platform can create, it just gets people into trouble sometimes. It's like, just because you have flexibility doesn't mean you should go all in on being too flexible, or not trying to standardize your processes, or not trying to create a common operating model or common tool set across the enterprise. So that's one. I think the other is, it does put a little bit more pressure on your IT staff to maintain these systems, which in my opinion is, it is a risk. It is a challenge. It's a cost, but in my opinion, I think it's a healthier long-term, and it's more viable long-term risk to take on, because I think at the end, what it does is it forces the organization to own their technology decisions, to own their use of that technology, and they're not as likely to fall into that trap of vendor lock-in, or just being too over dependent on a software vendor or a technical implementer to help them maintain that software longer term. So I think it's actually a blessing and a curse, mostly a blessing though, honestly, but that risk, that could scare some people to think that, well, now I've got to have a more robust IT department to manage this stuff. That's, in my opinion, that's better than having to be at the whim of a outside consulting firm that you have to pay every time you want to do any sort of change or any sort of update to the system.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I want to kind of shift into our next newsworthy topic, but really just a lot of this next topic is honing in on one thing that I mentioned in this previous first article, and that was Salesforce and how they have the agent exchange program now. So this is talking about how they just launched the agent exchange program, which is a new marketplace designed to speed up AI agent adoption and create new monetization opportunities for its partners. Right now, it features actions, topics, and templates from over 200 partners across industries like finance, HR, sales, and healthcare. So what does this actually mean? It means businesses can use the ready-made components like integrations, workflows, and AI-driven responses to expand their agents and what they can do without building everything from scratch. There are two types of templates available. There are prompt templates, which are pre-written AI prompts that guide interactions. And then there are agent templates, which are more advanced, offering a structured framework for building AI agents quickly. Now, Salesforce, like we talked about previously, is already competing with Google, AWS, Microsoft, and others in the AI automation space. But launching this marketplace can give them a major first mover type of advantage. Analysts say it will help drive the adoption of Agentforce, especially among small to mid-sized businesses that want to balance between pre-built and custom AI solutions. Eric, with Salesforce pushing hard into AI-driven automation with AI agent exchange, do you think this move will significantly boost AI adoption in enterprise software, or is this just a buzz-heavy kind of play to keep up with competitors?
No, I think it actually will work in their advantage, because what I like about it is it's creating it's sort of leveraging the collective knowledge of the Salesforce community, the broader Salesforce community, instead of just relying or being dependent on Salesforce as a company to create all the AI competencies you might need or want. This is sort of opening up innovation to its entire ecosystem. And I think that's really powerful, especially in something that's changing as quickly as AI, and it's still hasn't truly been fully adopted or embraced by the mainstream yet, at least mainstream businesses, I should say. So I think that that's going to work to their advantage. And you compare that to, some of the bigger counterparts, the bigger competitors in the space that are doing the opposite, which is more of a closed system of just the software vendor providing all the capabilities. There's a limit, no matter how big the company is and no matter how big the R&D budget is, there's a limit to how fast they can move and how innovative they can be. And I don't think that's going to be enough to compete with the Salesforces of the world. And I think it's not just Salesforce, by the way. You're also starting to see companies like NetSuite is starting to open up their community or open up their ecosystem to other developers. Microsoft has always had that model where they take, they open up their D365 core product and they allow third-party developers and partners to build on that, either extensions for certain industries or functions or modifications to fit certain types of industries. So I think those are the types of companies that are going to have the advantage going forward, especially in this AI world.
Yeah, that makes sense. With agent exchange supposed to be this middle ground between pre-built and custom AI solutions, do you think companies will actually take advantage of this customization, or will they default to more of a plug and play option?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of them will take advantage of it. But again, I think back to your earlier question, it does put pressure on the internal IT staff to maintain this stuff. So you have to have some controls in place or parameters and make sure you're not letting everyone go off and do their own thing or create stuff from scratch when they don't necessarily need to. So yeah, I think as long as you have parameters in place, you just got to find that right balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more, I guess, question, more so looking at the long term with this. What impact do you see with AI-driven agents having on enterprise software? Could we reach a point where AI agents replace traditional ERP workflows entirely?
Yeah, that's a good question that I want to get into a bit with Khalid in the discussion next, around AI. But I think AI agents. I think there's a lot that AI agents could be doing. And back to the earlier question that one of the audience members asked on social media about who should be doing the work as far as maintaining and entering data in systems. I think my first knee-jerk reaction was, well, AI agents might be the ideal answer to that, because no one really likes maintaining their ERP software anyway. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of people that are super upset about not being able to go search for data or enter data anymore in their ERP system. I think they'd rather be doing something else or something more fun or more strategic. So no, I think it is certainly a possibility. I'll be curious to see how it unfolds. I'm also curious to see what the real expert on this, Khalid Morris, thinks about that, who will be on next.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into this conversation with Khalid and see everything that he has to say today.
Yeah, should be a great conversation. He's been on the show before, but never to talk explicitly about AI and data combined. He's been on to talk about data management and other topics, but this will be the first time we've sat down to have this conversation in front of the audience here. So it'd be great to have him on. We're going to have Khalid Morris on here in just a moment. We're going to talk about AI and data strategies and how you should be thinking about AI and data for your digital transformations. And then later in the show, we'll dive into a case study of that $150 million project happening in the UK right now, which is the Matrix ERP implementation intended to automate and modernize the UK government. So we're going to dive into that case study. And more specifically, we're going to talk about some of the big red flags we're seeing in that project and some of the things that lead us to think that might be a troubled or failed project waiting to happen. So be sure to stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
With 1,000 lies and a good disguise, hit 'em right between the eyes, hit 'em right between the eyes. When you walk away.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 212. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions, sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. And of course, this podcast is the tech agnostic view of the world of digital transformation, including strategy, people, process, and technology. And speaking of technology, AI is something we can't get by talking about when we're talking about technology. Even if we wanted to avoid the topic, it's really hard to, and if not impossible. And we're going to dive into the AI and data here in just a moment. We're going to bring on our guest for today, Khalid Morris, who's a director of strategy and transformation here at Third Stage Consulting. He's written a book about AI strategy, and he's certainly one of our key leaders in the thought leadership space and the delivery space of AI strategy and implementation. So we want to really just dive in and talk about AI strategy, data management, and how the two intersect and how organizations should be thinking about this whole AI and data work stream within their digital transformation. So with that all being said, Khalid, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this will be a fun conversation. I've been looking forward to this for a few weeks now since we first scheduled it earlier this year. But before we get started and dive into all things related to data and analytics and AI, tell us a little bit first about your kind of your role at Third Stage and also your background. How'd you grow up in this space?
Well, I'm one of the directors of strategy and transformation at Third Stage. I've been doing that since 2021. So a few years now. I kind of left the Big Four world. So I was coming from Deloitte, but I also spent some time at Accenture, and I've been doing consulting really since I left graduate school at the University of Denver. So we're pushing. Yeah, I'm almost scared to start talking about numbers because it's just starting to date me here. But we've been doing this for over 20 years.
Yeah, well, when I first met you, you were just a young pup who was just getting started. Now here we are, 15 years later.
Doing podcast 20 years later.
Yeah, who knew? So how did you like tell us a little bit about how you got started in consulting and sorry, because you have an interesting upbringing. You're not a career consultant necessarily. You didn't start off in consulting, but tell us where you started, how you adjusted or transitioned into consulting, and ultimately how you ended up in this whole space with AI and data.
Yeah, I'm not a career consultant and I'm not a career tech guy. My background is actually finance and accounting. That's how I started. I went to graduate school in business here in Denver, and then coming out of that is when I started my consulting journey. And with that, you kind of brought me in from a financial perspective because that was my background. That's kind of what I knew. That's what was studied. And the tech side of me in consulting just started to develop because I just would say yes, and I'd figure out problems. I'm a problem solver. I kind of like challenges, and it didn't bother me to have to figure things out. But the information age really just brought about a lot of just a changes and sort of a dynamic element to the business marketplace that I don't think a lot of businesses were really ready for. And I kind of got caught up in a lot of that, in that, you can't always just hire for a certain positions, because it's not like school teaches you, how to deal with the latest and greatest technology, right? The schools usually teach you matured, established things. And so a lot of the times I would just kind of be on site and they would ask me, oh, could you figure this out? And that's kind of what pulled me into certainly the data side, but just into the technology side in general, is just being on projects and being responsible for them and having to solve some problems that we couldn't hire for in a month and a half or 2 months. And so we had to kind of figure out, and then you sort of build an acumen based on that. So just answering questions, figuring out questions and answering questions is sort of how I kind of got looped into the technical aspect of it. And it kind of brought me into some really technical spaces, particularly around data and data integration and kind of merging applications. I kind of was there from the programming side to the software as a service side, and kind of as things kind of went to cloud computing, your role kind of changes, and the ask kind of change, and you sort of start to solve different problems, and it sort of just starts to build a different just professional acumen or skill set in general. And I think we're kind of there now with AI. I think AI is sort of just popped up, and then all of a sudden you have to answer all of these AI questions, and you have to figure things out from an AI perspective. It reminds me of the cloud. It reminds me of when things went from on-prem to cloud-based. You kind of have this sort of shift where companies sort of had to figure out, like, how do I move stuff? How does this work best for me? Is there value here? And obviously, organizations are smart, they figure it out. But yeah, this era now reminds me of that.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for sure. And it's kind of like that transition from on-prem to cloud, but on steroids. I mean, just
on steroids. Yeah. Well, because there's a paradigm shift on top of that too. So it's not just a functional need there, but there's a major threat to your business can get canceled from a strategic side, right? So there's a AI strategy part that sort of needs to be layered with what it is you're doing. And these are technical things. So it's not like people just know, like you say, okay, well, what is your strategy? They don't really have a strategic view of this, because it wasn't like they've been thinking about this for the last 5 or 10 years, right? It just sort of popped up on them. It's like, I don't know, you just presented this question yesterday. I don't know the answer yet. So that's where it becomes interesting from a consulting perspective, from a business perspective. And, it's just one of those things that we all have to adjust to.
Yeah, it's the first time in my career, I don't know about you, but it's the first time in my career where I feel like, as a profession in consulting, you're sort of, like you said, there's not a lot to draw on in terms of maturity and well-established ways of doing things. And so that's what makes it pretty exciting. Just it's changing so fast, and we're all learning a lot as we go through this transition to AI and everywhere we're headed. Keel says, is it true that a lot of organizations collect data, but they don't use that data for decision making? What are your thoughts on that, Khalid, just to start things off, and then I'll get into some of the questions I have too.
I think that it's very, very true. I think that organizations, I think the cloud has softened people on data, right? Like, it has sort of created this security blanket for folks that they've kind of been living in for the last, 10 or so years, that they've kind of been in this cloud paradigm. And I say that because your data is sort of in this weird space that you don't really have access to, but sometimes you have access to, that you might have access to, that you probably should have access to, but you don't know where it is. Or it's in this space where, and this is normally what we see with our clients, is just, it's all over the place. You might have 10 different programs that you're working on, and the data in the cloud lives with one software group, and over there is doing a different cloud, and you have proper integrations in place maybe, but the data lives kind of over there too. And it's all over the place. So if you're doing inventory, For in our case, when we kind of do a catalog or some kind of inventory, then you just see data sources all over. And it's particularly bad for groups that have legacy software internally. And so then you have to couple the parts of it that is SaaS based, and then with the parts of your organization that kind of has this more structured old legacy kind of software that nobody knows how to touch, or maybe you're dealing with some employees that kind of have tenure there because they know how to operate a software that most aren't even learning anymore. So it's so many different dynamics, but yeah, that's sort of what happens. You just sort of have a collection of data all over the place, kind of like a messy house. You just have things all over. And I think part of what AI forces us to do is what we should do anyway. But AI kind of forces it, depending upon what your strategy is you got to go clean up your room. And once you clean it up, then it makes more sense. It's like, oh, okay, this is why I've been looking for this. I didn't know this was there. And you kind of start to answer some of your own questions. I, for one, I can't study or think if my room is like really, really messy. So it shows what I'm going through in life. If you walk into my room and it's nice and clean, then everything's fine. If you walk in my room and it's messy, it's like you got a lot going on right now. You're probably pretty stressed. So I liken that to the data environments at organizations.
Yeah. And I think that's why products and companies such as Snowflake have done so well, because they're sort of taking advantage of the fact that organizations have these data silos and different systems and all that stuff. But to your point, so many companies just can't get the basic, like they can't run a basic report because the data is such a mess. And then you start throwing in AI as a potential option. People get all excited about AI and think, oh, that's cool. Let's use all these AI capabilities. Well, AI doesn't do crap for you if you don't have good data. I mean, if you've got bad data, you're just wasting money by trying to get AI to work for you. So do you see that being a pitfall or an obstacle to companies fully?
Well, I almost, and this is just like with any, I guess, shift like this, a lot is being thrown at you at once. We are so not prepared kind of for that moment. I don't think we really walked into 2025 thinking this is what we have to deal with, right? Literally, we're in March and everyone's dealing with it. And I don't know if January 1, that was on the top of the resolution list, right? Like it sort of has just sort of been flooded. In terms of me, it has been, but just in general, I think a lot of companies have been thrown into this and they feel a bit surprised, and they turn around and they see all these tools. And it's just like, so you can do this and you can do that. And so they're seeing the advanced elements of it. And that is kind of what's jogging. AI is very feature oriented right now. Everyone wants to tell you their AI feature, and that's almost clouding the back end. It's almost like you can see the UI and all the pretty things that's happening, but you don't know how the application was actually built. And on the back end, it kind of tells a different story. And that to me is where the data lives, because if you really want to empower your AI strategy, then you'll do something on the data. The data part of this story can't be ignored, right? Like, so they kind of work in unison depending upon what your strategy is. Sure, if you just want to use features, go feature yourself to death. You can go chat GPT it, or use one of the more popular faces. ERP systems have incorporated these quick, nice, kind of easy ways to sell their program. They say, hey, we have this AI feature or that AI feature. And so, you almost have to ask yourself, when am I in AI and when am I not in AI? You almost feel like you're Neo in the Matrix. You're like, so when am I in it and when am I not in it? Like, how does it work? And still you have this back end that is where all of your data lives. Like so are you searching for AI features that are outside of your organization, or are you searching for capability within your organization from an AI perspective? Those are natural questions. And then when you ask those questions, then you have to ask yourself the data that supports it. Like, where is it? Where does it live? And is it empowering whatever AI feature I'm trying to use in the way that I expect it to?
Right. Makes total sense. we're gonna keep coming back to this AI thread for sure, and that's a key part of what we're gonna talk about. But here's a comment or a question here from Arun on YouTube. Says, what key factors should organizations consider when planning a large scale data migration? That's a pretty loaded, that's a big question, but how would you summarize some of the things that companies need to think about as they think about how to clean up their data and migrate to these new systems?
That's really, I think, where it starts. I mean, you can want to do data migration till you're blue in the face, but you really have to see the raw form. I think the steps are pretty basic, and it kind of starts with cleaning. And so, you, especially if you have multiple data sources. So I don't know what the source end of that kind of looks like. And it would be great if you just have one source of data and you have to migrate one source of data to one other target source online or some secure kind of storage area. That's great. And if you can get it, that's awesome. But that's usually not the case. I mean, usually it's a multitude of data sources. And when they come in, they look different and they act different, because one source, they're used to it this way, and another source, they're used to it another way. And you have to sort of create rules and standards. And that's kind of where the cleaning part of it comes from. So really just having a plan at each of these stages is what I would suggest. And it's okay to start slow and start kind of at that first level to kind of say, how do we get everything that we want to migrate into a staging environment that allows us to sort of push where the target is, right? Like, I think that's a smarter strategy than trying to push every source to the actual target. I feel like there's a little more work there. But getting everything kind of in the same place, and then starting to do the cleansing exercises so that you kind of have a basic set of data that you can kind of apply. I don't call them global rules, but apply sort of a set of transformation rules to, so that it can properly load into whatever the target is. That would sort of be my approach.
Yeah, makes total sense. And it's not just about getting the data there. That's part of it. It's cleaning up the data, mapping it, migrating, all the stuff you just talked about. But what about the governance behind it, as far as putting processes in place to ensure that the data doesn't just get corrupt again as soon as you put it in? Because I think a lot of times people don't realize the impact that humans have on dirty data and siloed data and all that stuff. So how do you?
Well, it's for really large scale data, you kind of have to do that because it's so much, and you kind of have owners depending on your environment. If you're in an environment like we've described, where you have data that's scattered all over the place, usually they have different owners, and that's usually why. You might have a product owner that uses one SaaS program. And someone, a different department, uses a different program, and part of the exercise is to sort of bring all of that over into this sort of migrated area. And kind of in instances like that, you're kind of living in a world where you kind of need owners. Like, okay, can you tell me, is this right? Like, is this all of the data? Is this accurate? A technical person can't really speak to that. A functional person can usually tell you, or the owner can usually tell you, these are all of our suppliers, or this one shouldn't be there anymore. We don't use this guy anymore, or this value is correct. It ties to whatever validation that they're sort of using. So from a data governance perspective, for large scale data, you definitely need it. If it's a smaller company, maybe you can get away with some things that you can get away with kind of a more reduced kind of governance kind of effort. But if it's a larger organization, I don't know that you have a choice. Once you get past the actual migration, though, I think that's where data governance becomes interesting, because most people just leave it. They just sort of let it go. And that's where your organization starts to fall back into some of the bad habits that it's had for some time. So I think data governance is a great maintenance, a great way to remain efficient, a great way to check on the validity of your data and accuracy of it. kind of across the board. It's sort of a basic lean principle, if you will, if you think about it from a continuous improvement perspective. So I'm an advocate of keeping governance measures in place kind of post-migration, post-implementation, and just kind of have quality checks around those things, just to make sure that the health of your data is good going forward. I don't think organizations think of their data as a strategic asset. Like if you ask them, okay, what are the assets of your organization? They'll list buildings and they'll list all of these cool things that really have a tangible value to the organization, but they won't think of data as part of that. And I personally believe that it's probably the most valuable asset in your organization. Right? You take your data out, your whole organization collapses. And so it's very, very important, but a lot of times organizations don't treat it like that. And so when I say things like ongoing and data governance should be a part of your practice, it's just, I mean, you would do that for any valuable asset. You would just make sure that you have proper processes and procedures in place just to safeguard the value of that, because it's a significant part of your organizational value. Well, to me, data is the same way, but we don't put safeguards on it. Instead, we have programs, 40, 50 different programs, and the data is kind of all over the place.
Yeah. That's well said. And here's another interesting question related to that. This is from Ognian on YouTube. Says clients asking for AI magic before the tidy up your data first stage is free. Wow, I cannot read today. Clients asking for AI magic before the tidy up your data first stage is frequent. You nailed it. I'm asking you for AI and you're telling me my data is bad.
Right. That's a hard conversation to have too, because it's like you're talking on two different kind of wavelengths. I just, as you know, kind of wrote this book, Future Proofing Your Business with AI. And, that was the challenge. It's kind of more of a conversational narrative that we have with our clients. And it's almost a plea of, look, I know you want to get here. I know you want to have these great conversations and these trends, but you almost want to really think about your strategy from the ground up.
Yeah.
And when you're really having a hard, like, how do we become competitive tomorrow? What does our organization look like tomorrow? You're not going to have those conversations if you're not talking about your data, right? If you're talking about everyone else's data, or, oh, we can bring in this from the cloud, or, oh, we can do this, or we can do that. But when you ask yourself the core parts of this business, what makes it special, and the data that drives that, that to me is where you start your AI conversation. Is okay. Let's get to what we do as a core, what we do well, what we do special, and let's look at the data there, and then ask yourself, how are we? Where does this data live? Do we have access to it? And is there analytical, intelligent, or AI-driven strategic elements that we can place on top of that? Do we even have that capability? And most of the time, the answer is no, we don't, because the data is sort of contained into this space. So then that opens up all the things that I think the viewer there was kind of alluding to, was now we have to get into migration conversations. Now we have to kind of get into these spaces of how do we create a safe space for our data so that we as an organization can apply value to it. We as an organization can actually use it. I can't use it when it's in for, I'm not picking on any, I'm not going to pick on any ERP systems, but I can't use the data the way I want to use it when it's in some other program.
Yeah. And I've got to follow up to that exact point here in just a second. But before I do, I want to share with the audience something that we're pretty excited about at Third Stage. We are launching next week. It should be published, but you can actually pre-register for it. It's a guide to AI strategy and implementation. So if you scan this QR code right here on the top left side of your screen, or if you're watching this after the fact on the podcast, you can go to the show notes below. We'll include a link to it. But scan the QR code right here and you can get access. We'll email it to you once it's released here in the next few days. But it's our pretty dense, information-packed guide to how to define an AI strategy and how to plan for an AI implementation as part of your digital transformation. So if that's something you're interested in on the AI front, be sure to download that and you'll get that paper as soon as it's released. So I'll leave that QR code up here for just a second for you to scan. It's your convenience here, and hopefully you'll learn a lot from reading that. So here's a question, Khalid, just to build on what you just said right before I mentioned the guide to AI. Nikhil on YouTube asks, is vendor lock-in a big challenge in data migration? So you were just talking about ERP versus AI, and I kind of want to dive into this a little bit because, all the big ERP vendors, NetSuite, SAP, Microsoft, all these guys and gals are investing heavily in AI. I mean, I don't know of a single software vendor that's not talking heavily about AI and investing in AI. So how do we navigate this whole vendor lock-in thing as it is? Because already I think a lot of companies are struggling with one system being the attempted one size fits all answer to all their technology needs. Now you throw AI in the mix, and obviously the ERP vendors are kind of trying to do a land grab here to try and get as much of that spend as they can. So how do you navigate that that separation, or should there be a separation between AI?
Yeah, I don't know that I look at it as a vendor lock. I think every organization has to answer an AI question. So I don't know how you get away from dealing with everyone else's AI, right? As it relates to whatever it is that you have going on. So in software before AI, like last year, or 2 years ago, if you want to go really, really far back, we kind of had a lot of discussions around best of breed versus kind of a unified kind of model. And no matter how you sliced it, you kind of always got pushed into some form of best of breed. It was either dramatic, where you just basically had pieces all over the place that you sort of brought together through integration, or you kind of had a space where 80% of your organization was on one platform and the rest of the 20% was sort of sparsed. And even ERP companies were pushing their third parties, and so you never really had a space where you had one organization, one software in your organization. And I think now with AI, you're kind of in that same mode. I mean, every organization is going to have their little slice of heaven, and they're going to sell that. You go look online, they're going to say, well, this is what we're doing in AI. It's almost like if you're not doing something in AI, then you're out of date. Then you're not serious about software, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know that you can get into a space where you're kind of locked in, per se, and that you're just sort of dealing. Okay, well, what can you do to me? The questions that what can you do for me? The questions that I would have is, what are you doing with your AI, right? Because it's easy to take your eyes and turn to software companies for help, and say, okay, well, how can you AI enable my organization? But there's a host of, and we dealt with some of this in Stratosphere last year, but there's just a host of, I don't call them issues, but just things to sort out, with respect to where are you getting this data from? Where's the legalities around, some of this? Are there sort of hidden biases that are sort of in the algorithm that you're using, which may push me in one direction kind of versus the other, right? So there's just a series of things that you don't really control or understand from the way that another software company approaches AI. Right. They just present it to you, say, hey, we have an AI feature. And then you're like, well, that's great. It'd be great if you explained it to me. Like, how does how do these biases work? Like, because all AI, they sort of have these built-in biases around their algorithm, and you kind of need to kind of have maintenance around that exercise, right? So if they're not, after they explain that part to you, to me, the question is, well, what do I want to do? I mean, it's great that you're doing that, and that I think that's great. And we certainly could use that. I think that's a great feature. But when I think about my organization and the core data parts that drive me, this is kind of where I need to take AI for this company, right? So I think we're going to get into an environment where everyone has their own AI, and the organization itself has to have their own personal AI that's sort of driving their organization, right? And that's, to me, outside of what Microsoft is sort of giving me, because Microsoft gives me a bunch of great tools, and another ERP system I have, or a bunch of great tools, and I may pick up another tool some kind of way, and all of that's great, and all of that is internet-wide access, right? But I don't know if I want internet-wide access for what I'm doing, right? So my organization data is not going to be available. I don't want my organization data. We're actually starting to put some of that in our vendor contracts. I don't want my AI, my core data to be available to the entire world. I want my core data to be available to me and my organization. And I do want AI that's layered on top of that to give me a competitive advantage for the data that I collect, right? And a SAP can't help you that per se, right? Like they'll contain the data and that sort of thing, and you can migrate the data to a special place, and then you can deal with how you want your AI strategy to sort of function, particularly if it's a unique sort of functioning there. But inside SAP, it's going to be SAP for SAP clients. And they're going to have sort of these generic AI tools that work and that's great and that you should leverage, but it may not necessarily be that real unique driver that you're looking for, that you need for your organization. And so that's where I don't really look at it as lock-in. I think that you accept and you continue to build and grow and develop your AI strategy for your organization, so that you're leveraging multiple tools, and then naturally your organization can start to choose and work off of what's driving it the best, or what's going to kind of give it the best advantage going forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I kind of see both sides here, as far as there's value on both sides. Because I mean, you look at like SAP, for example. You mentioned SAP, and I remember on my journey to S4HANA podcast, I don't remember who the guest was, but if you are interested in SAP stuff, if you go to journeyto s4hana.com, that's another sister podcast we do that's specialized. It's more focused on companies that are going through S4HANA implementations. But during one of the podcast interviews that I did there, one of the executives, I think from SAP, that was on there, was talking about how they had gotten approval from, I think it was 30,000 customers to share their data with their AI model. And on one hand, you think, well, that's pretty powerful. If you can get 30,000 of the world's biggest organizations sharing their data in this AI model, training this AI model, that's pretty powerful. That's pretty awesome. But then you think, to your point, the counterpoint that you made is, but you want to own that data. You want to create the competitive advantage. You don't necessarily want to help all your peers and all your competitors, So it's like, on one hand, they've got the scale, they've got the technology in a way that you could probably never replicate internally in-house with your own AI strategy, but you're just sort of watering down or sort of giving up your competitive advantage and your data, by the way. I mean, they don't own your data, but they can use it if you give them permission.
Well, and then you could go to the next step with that, and you have organizations that have sensitive data, and by law they can't even do that. So then what do? Right? It's like how much of this do I even have the ability to, just as an organization, just roll up into kind of this sort of standardized model where your AI model can learn all of these things and kind of provide these sort of features. I think this is where we get into the maturity of AI, and we don't even have laws right now that contain a lot of these things. And going forward, they do somewhat have some laws actually in Europe, but in this country we don't really have much framework at all. And so what happens when that's there? And then it becomes, I don't know how much of this great feature that you can or cannot use, or even having to create containers around some of that. So, for me, I think it's great, and you let them deal with whatever they have to deal with, and you accept. Like if you mentioned SAP for Microsoft, I don't even know how you use Microsoft now without using Copilot. It's such a great tool, and it's going to be all in the middle of everything that they do. And so, you might not even have a choice in terms of how much of an AI you're using or not using from a given system. But it still comes back to, it's great that all these great people are thinking for me, and they're all smart, and all of these tools are brilliant, and they're very effective and helpful. But who knows your organization better? You or a tier one software, or if it's not even tier one, whatever software you're using. The answer is going to be you. And when you get into a small room with your team and you start to think about what really is going to move the needle for your organization, your AI strategy is going to look a lot different than what they're presenting you. And that's the conundrum that I think a lot of organizations are in the middle of. Sometimes they don't even know it. And they're having these AI conversations, and it's cool that they're having them. But I think the one conversation they're not having is, well, what is my organization going to do? What do we want to do? What do we need to do? What do we want to do? And I think that when you're in a space where you're competing against other organizations, the ones that are having those conversations and they're coming back to the marketplace with a real value add component to what they do, I think those organizations can win. And I think those organizations, set themselves up for long-term success versus the organizations that are kind of being reactive, like, wait, what can we do with what feature? And this, I don't even know if they're applying OCM to a lot of these new features. And so, who's using it, who's not using it, who cares to, how does it just turns into all these questions rather than kind of having kind of this functional practice within your business that kind of almost partners with AI, that becomes a part of strategy. So when I say AI strategy, I'm kind of thinking of more of a partnership versus, kind of having useful tools, like just another spreadsheet.
I'm here with Khalid Morris. We're talking about AI and data strategies for your digital transformation. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
I'm gonna leave it all out there. I'm gonna leave it all out there tonight. I'm gonna leave it all out there.
Hello and welcome back to the Transformation Ground Control Podcast, episode number 212. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent and tech-agnostic consulting company that helps clients through their digital transformations, including their AI strategies and implementations. And speaking of AI, we're here with Khalid Morris from the Third Stage Consulting team talking about AI strategy and data management. This is actually a whole topic we're going to cover here in 2 weeks on this podcast. We'll have Marcus Harris on and someone on LinkedIn. I don't see the name of the person, but someone on LinkedIn said this topic was addressed by Marcus Harris recently. And Marcus Harris is a software attorney that deals a lot with not only enterprise technology, but he also deals with intellectual property. So a lot of what we'll talk about here in 2 weeks from today is with Marcus Harris to talk about the legal implications of all this AI and data stuff, which is constantly changing. I mean, it's just like all of us. I think he's even learning and trying to keep up with all the evolutions of the legal implications here. So Feto on YouTube says, "I'm glad someone is having the talk, which is not inflicted by the hype." I like the word inflicted. And we have an infliction of hype in this industry. Inflicted by hype. That sounds like a TV show or a podcast series or something.
Right.
So this is really interesting stuff. Okay, so there's like 3 different directions I could go, but just based on what you just said. What about? Let me go this direction. This is a question that was sort of stimulated by one of our peers at Third Stage. Yesterday, we had an internal meeting that you and I were both on, and Amanda Patton, who is one of our directors. We were having an internal meeting, totally unrelated to AI. We weren't even talking about AI, but we sort of had an in-passing conversation about ERP vendors and how they're handling AI, and just how some vendors are more mature and sophisticated in their AI tool set than others. And she made a comment in this meeting about NetSuite. She was talking about NetSuite in particular, about how it's a cloud-based system, and because it's a cloud-native system, that gives them some advantages from an AI perspective. How does cloud factor into all this? I guess is where I'm going with this. So when you look at cloud and SaaS solutions, especially products like NetSuite or Salesforce or Workday, these systems that were built in the cloud and the architecture is built for the cloud, does that give those sorts of vendors any sort of advantage when it comes to their AI tool sets? Even though we're talking about, on one hand, maybe we shouldn't have the ERP vendors doing all of our AI stuff for us, but for the ones that are building AI, does a cloud SaaS model help some of these cloud native systems, or are they in a better position from an AI?
I think that it can. I think that the cloud kind of provides you with a certain access point, and there's a certain cleanliness and structure to the data that sort of lives in a cloud infrastructure that is very understandable, and it's probably easy to move around. I think that the whole cloud strategy was sort of built around ways to move data. So the integration part of just cloud architecture really became a gigantic thing. So if data is living in a cloud somewhere, it sort of naturally creates sort of an easier path for integration. But just in general, I think it kind of goes more back to the AI and kind of what it is. AI is like an amoeba almost. It spreads, and its tentacles are kind of all over. So my question to something like that is, how much of the data does that AI cover? Is it all over that data set? Does it also include other elements there from the web or something like that? Like, you really have to start to ask the question around your AI, kind of what's contained, and what is the layer there from a AI perspective. In software development, there's kind of this kind of standard kind of practice called separation of concerns, and so you would have this, at least the way I learned it, you kind of would have these spaces where you kind of have business logic, and then you would have kind of your data kind of logic, and then you would kind of have what your programming kind of look like, and you would separate these things so that if you needed to change your data, if you wanted a different database or whatever the case may be, you can change it, and it doesn't have to impact the rest of the application that you sort of built. I think of AI as a fourth layer that's kind of sitting right there too. And so when you kind of have that layered kind of breakdown, if AI is kind of sitting on top of your data, then that's that's sort of the parameters of what this AI feature or program is sort of working off of. And you almost want to ask yourself and this is the part of the story you don't know when you're dealing with ERP companies and they kind of throw out, oh, we have this AI feature, then it kind of my mind goes to, okay, where are you getting your data from? Is it me? Is it me and him? Is it all of us? Is it them? Is it like where are you getting your information from? And that to me is the big driver in that for ERP. And they're not really always forthcoming. You kind of mentioned SAP and them kind of isolating kind of those groups and kind of getting their permission to kind of work on their AI train model there. That's probably the wave. That's probably what companies will probably have to do. Maybe SAP did that because Europe is starting to create laws around some of that, versus because I don't really always see that from American companies. They're not really asking a lot of those kind of questions. They're just doing stuff. And I think it is something that we need to kind of know first, like, where are you getting this? What does it contain? And then kind of get into kind of, well, what are we doing with it? Like, what am I getting out of providing you with access to this or that? And then I think things start to make more sense to me. Otherwise, I think we're just having kind of these feature strategy, kind of random conversations about like clothing. Mm-hmm. Oh, you got a new pair of shoes. Oh, that's awesome. I mean, I don't even know if those shoes are for, basketball or football or casual walking or what. It's just, they look cool. And I'm glad you got them. You're happy, you're comfortable with them and all of that. But I have no idea of how effective those are for you, what you're doing in them, like where they were made or what. So I think that we kind of need to kind of have another layered conversation on the AI side that kind of gets back to what the end is, not kind of what the beginning is, but how all of this looks on the other side.
Yeah. Makes sense. I want to invite the audience again to check out our guide to AI. If you didn't catch it the first time, here's the QR code. If you download that guide, you can get our guide to AI strategy and implementation. It'll be released next week. So if you go ahead and register now, we'll send you an email with a link to that as soon as it's published next week. But one thing I want to do, I'm going to see if I can share this article with you here, Khalid. I'm just putting up a headline article from a Wall Street Journal. This is a really interesting article that came out a few days ago. And it kind of leads me to another question here. In fact, let me do something here. I'm kind of there we go. So this article I'm popping up on the screen was about Disney and how it's sort of like a feature story about an employee at Disney who downloaded some AI tool. A hacker got into that AI tool and then it got into the Disney systems as a result. It kind of, I bring up this article because it's top of mind. It was recently, published as a feature story in the Wall Street Journal, but it brings up a really interesting question or a thought around cybersecurity. How do we, AI is opening up a whole nother set of loopholes or backdoor entries for cyber attacks. Now we don't just have to lock down our core ERP system. We've got to lock down all the AI tools and whatever other tools are integrated with that ERP system. So how does cybersecurity, what are your thoughts? I know it's a big general question, but
I think it's the same question. Now, I don't want to speak too far out of kind of my expertise in terms of what I know and don't know. But when I hear that, it really brings me back to the data, because as we start, that's your most strategic asset. So no one's trying to hack for no reason. They're trying to hack for the data. They want access to the streams of information, the data components there that kind of live in Disney. And so AI has sort of created, natural pipes into your data sets. It just does. So you can naturally see how something like that can happen, and why I think it's more important to kind of, to ask those kind of next questions around these AI features, and kind of really getting into the containers around, okay, well, what does this, where does this start and stop? And what does this have access to, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next, for me, if you do prioritize and protect your data as a strategic asset, then you do have a lot of those security layers kind of in place, right? It's organizations like Disney. I don't want to say organizations like Disney are easy to hack, because obviously that's not true. But I can see organizations like Disney having data all over the place because they're so gigantic, and because they have so many companies. Disney is one of my favorite companies, in the history of companies, even though they kind of have some weird historical pieces there. But I love their model. And now when you think about them, they own a lot of media. They're gigantic now. And it's easy to, just from what you know around acquisitions, it's like, well, how am I integrating, ESPN into the Disney model? They kind of have their own processes, their own procedures, their own kind of, this or that. So once you add AI into the mix, it's like, well, where's the shutoff valve? Is the water just going to flow all over the place, or is it contained to this, or is it contained to that? Or are we allowing this to sort of be all over the place? And then, like, your next question is, well, where are the safeguards for the data? And I think AI is moving so quickly that I don't see the same level of care, the same level of just in the regular programmatic sense, when you kind of have things like separation of concern, you have kind of these security elements and layers. And I think there's a lot of emphasis that's placed in basic programming around security and hacking and concern in that. And AI is just sort of this wild, wild west space where everyone's kind of just quick to market. How do I get this out there quickly? I want this feature to kind of live. And, we have these APIs because nobody's doing this themselves. So they create this API with, chat or somewhere else. And, you kind of have this sort of agreement to sort of piggyback on everyone else's growth and development in this space, rather than take time and care to sort of build it the right way, and just organically. That's the part that's sort of not happening. And so I can see how stuff like that just sort of pops up, is because, really smart programmers understand that and can see that, oh, okay, I can get through back doors that, this third party AI tool that, this organization leveraged in order to kind of do this or that. I can kind of get through that back door to get access to this strategic asset that's very, very valuable, that's left a little unsafe.
Yeah, very true. And it's just, another reminder that, every time you layer on a new technology or a new tool, how it affects your overall cybersecurity risk level. Here's an interesting point. AI is at the user acceptance testing stage. In the real world, there will be issues which could slow down the implementation of AI technology. That's a good point.
Right. No, that's a real statement. I mean, we're at the production level, like with user acceptance, and we find bugs along the way. But this is live.
Right. Yeah.
We shouldn't be finding bugs live, but that's just where the market is.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a couple other questions I'll pull up here. SaaS solutions, this kind of gets back to the point we're talking about with the advantage, if any, that cloud and SaaS providers might have. This is from Fado on YouTube, says SaaS solutions have the advantage of having the infrastructure needed for such workloads. But then he follows up to say small and medium organizations still struggle to invest in the needed infrastructure. How do you feel
they may struggle to, I think they struggle to understand it more. I think that SaaS has come a very, very long way. And I do think there are more affordable ways for small and mid-sized organizations to even, when you think about it, just the cloud infrastructure as a small organization, can you move all of your data to a private cloud? The answer is yes. does that have to cost you, a ransom note? And no, it doesn't have to, right? The thing that small and medium companies, they don't really have the luxury financially to just spend. And so they don't really know what to do with it once it's there. So it's like, well, yeah, I can do that. It won't be too expensive, but why would I do that? Like, what do I get out of that? And, how does that help my organization? And I think for the longest, I would totally agree with them until now. Like, no, now you do have an AI component that you can layer on top of that. So there is a way to create unique value for your organization that no one else will have by housing your data in that kind of structure. Now, you don't necessarily have to have that kind of structure in order to take advantage of AI, but you start talking about organic and safe and sort of kind of natural structures to take advantage of this sort of style of programming, and that makes sense. And so I agree and disagree kind of with that as a result, and that's largely because I think it was once too expensive to do, even though it was affordable. I think it was just no value prop a lot of times for a lot of owners. But I do think that can turn very, very quickly now.
Yeah. I totally agree. Now, what about companies that are getting started, or they're not sure where to get started with their AI journeys? I'm gonna answer my own question, but I'm not really answering it. I'm gonna let you answer it, but I'm giving the cheat answer here. Is if you want to get started on your AI journey, what you really should do is download this guide. So just scan this QR code right here. Guide to AI strategy and implementation. I'll leave it up for the rest of the conversation here. But beyond reading this guide, which is super information packed, what else can people be doing to get ready for their AI journeys? Like how should we get started, or what advice would you give to a team or an organization that's just dipping their toes in AI, trying to figure out how to move forward?
Well, and I kind of outlined some of this in the book, but it does kind of start with data. Now, I will couple that back with what you're saying here, which I do think is actually very, very important. We're kind of being a little cheeky with the QR code, but your research here is everything. Like, you do need to do your research. And I think part of that, when you think about it, is really just your planning stage. And like, what does planning sort of look like? AI strategy is very much just like business strategy at this point. It's going to turn into a natural parallel because there's a survival element there, and that your organization can be out of date, to be very, very blunt, in the future, by not taking care of the things that you need to take care of now from an AI perspective, right? Because your whole industry can be rendered useless, kind of with the snap of a finger, because the marketplace decides to go in a different direction, right? Because AI might be cheaper or easier of a solution to do what you've been profiting on for the last 10, 15 years. And so from that end, I think that the planning part is very, very important. I think you slow walk it a little bit, but you whiteboard. I think you really kind of get to a point where you're able to kind of start to set a vision for how your organization can look in an AI environment. And you're not going to be able to implement or execute on that particular vision without dealing with your data. So, for the practical side of the answer to this question is you start with your data, and you make sure that your data model fits your vision and your strategy and in terms of what you're trying to do. But I think the sexy answer and kind of where you're trying to get to is I think it's on the whiteboard. I think it's in the room, and you kind of being there with your team and being able to say, how can we benefit from this? It's doing basic stuff like SWOT analysis and kind of being able to really assess the strengths and weaknesses of a given strategy to really land on what is going to be of value to our organization, right? That's nothing to do with technology. And we at Third Stage do this a lot. We constantly walk into clients and we tell them that we're here, and yes, we understand technology, and yes, we've implemented all of these softwares, and yes, this is a huge technical shift for your organization, but this is not an IT exercise. This is a business exercise. And I think for AI, we're in the same conversation. I think that this is a business exercise, right? Like so you need to understand business wise what you're trying to do. And that's why I think it's important to have the AI conversation outside of ERP, because the ERP, they've already had that conversation, right? That's why they're coming to you in the marketplace and saying, these are the features. After we did our strategy, these are the features that we think make the most sense for our customers. And I think you kind of need to do the same thing. You kind of need to come up with what strategy is going to make sense for your customers and what they're dealing with. And you need to also understand that we're in a world now where your customers have access to AI. Right. So if your customers have access to AI and they can access these things and ask questions and find out answers to things that they couldn't necessarily find out answers to, how does that impact what we do? How does that impact what we provide? How do we have kind of an advanced level of conversation in our business with our customers, right? So that we're still providing them with value. So yes, I know you already looked this up and you already have this answer. This is for that answer. This is kind of take this to the next level rather than kind of starting at the ground. So I think there's levels in the conversations, and we can't answer that like outside of your org. I mean, your team deals with your business. You understand your strategic asset, your data. And so you kind of have to be into that room and start to answer those questions for yourself and for your organization. And then that'll start to shape. And you won't get there overnight. And this is the uncomfortable part about AI, because it'd be great if you can just have this really easy answer to just say, well, the answer is, and then you're done. You just go through this one workshop, you do it, and then you're done. And then your organization is great well into the future. And that's not the case. I think that this will be a bit ambiguous. You can go through the exercise of AI strategy and not have an AI answer for a couple months.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can go through that, you can do planning for it, you can start to do your data. I'm kind of talking in extremes. You should certainly have an answer before then, but I can see an organization going through the exercise, doing the whiteboarding, having a couple sessions, a couple rounds, and then having that eureka moment, a month into it, 2 months into it, and just saying, wow, if we did this, it would be a game changer. And that eureka moment, is not going to happen necessarily day one. It may. But I just, think that organizations should be patient with themselves and really just kind of do the strategic work necessary and follow more of a process, a strategy process for really arriving at an answer rather than, thinking that, I can just kind of Google it and then boom, it'll pop up in my face, and then kind of have this instantaneous, all right, we have our strategy kind of going forward. I think it may take a little more time than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is awesome. And actually, I think this is kind of funny. Hopefully you find this as entertaining as I do, Khalid. But I was while you were talking here, you were talking about your book, and you and I have been talking about how you wrote this book, and you're one of the most humble people I know that I've ever worked with. And I didn't realize, I was just Googling it. I didn't realize it was already published. It's on Amazon. It's doing well. It's got great reviews. So your book is actually out. You didn't, like a lot of people talk about writing a book, but you actually wrote and published a book, which I didn't realize until just this moment. So if you don't mind, I'm going to do this. I hate to put you on the spot. I know you're too humble for this, but I am going to put up a QR code top left corner. If you want to check out Khalid's book, just scan the QR code. It's got great reviews. I was just reading while you were talking. I was kind of reading through the reviews and going to the Amazon page here, but it looks like it's selling really well, and you've got great reviews. So congratulations on the book. I kind of wish I would have started with that, knowing that, but you're too humble. You're too humble to tell me you've got this book that's doing really well out there. I knew you wrote it, but I didn't know it was already published.
Well, I kind of needed to get through the exercise, and I've always wanted to write books. So, I always have, I did, I'm starting to kind of get more into the process of it, but I always had little pieces of things kind of, I was a big essay guy. And so I wrote a lot of essays. And so, for this, I needed to I needed to get through it and just kind of get to what do I think about this. And part of kind of this book, that I wrote, and a couple that I kind of want to do, it's just more, what is my thought around this? Like this topic, this issue that kind of keeps getting thrown in my face. And this was kind of that exercise for me to kind of really dive into this from a strategic consulting business kind of orientation that I think we naturally have here at Third Stage. And so I felt like in parts of this, I was kind of writing to a lot of groups that, we've had conversations with, that, you can't always have these things with your clients. They may not be interested in having this kind of conversation. It's almost a conversation I wish we could have. I wish we can talk about it this way and it not disrupt the project, or what we're doing or saying, or what you come to us with, because a lot of times clients will come to us with, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm looking for, and we're working within these kind of boxes. But so you don't get the liberty of kind of being able to say, no, this is really what you should do, and not caring about how it affects them. Like saying, well, I can't do that, that's going to take too long, or that's going to be this, or that's going to be that. Like saying, no, I'm just telling you what you kind of need to do to really think forward and protect yourself. That to me is the way I kind of approached it. And so it really wasn't, I don't know that I was writing the book until I was in the middle or towards the end, and it was like, oh no, you should just go ahead and make this a book, because these pieces in this story, you can just kind of make it fit. So it's a little technical, and it's kind of my first experience there. But I'm happy to get it out. It was just to now have a clear mind around how I view this insane topic, because AI is an insane topic, it's all over the place, and it's very confusing, and there's so many small, what did the person, he said hype? Yeah, there's so much of these hype conversations that are happening around AI that it's real easy to get distracted by the nuts and bolts of what's really going on.
Yeah, what was the word he used? Something hype. It was such a good word. I need to remember. Inflicted by the hype.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it.
That's a YouTube video.
Because you're reacting to it, right? And you're reacting to hype, which is the worst thing you could do, right? And you don't want to react to hype. You want to react to other things, but that's certainly how it feels.
All right. Thanks again, Khalid. Great conversation. And thank you to the audience for such good questions and good engagement on that conversation. We've got a lot more to cover, some debrief and follow-up questions we've got related to that conversation, related to the topic of AI and data. We're going to dive into that. And we're also going to dive into the ERP Matrix case study, which is the $150 million modernization effort going on right now for the government of the United Kingdom and the UK. So we're going to dive into and get into all that stuff here in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you'll want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 212. My name is Eric Kimberling, here with Darian Chwialkowski. We just had Khalid Morris on the show to talk about AI and data strategies. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation, Darian?
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Khalid had a lot of great thoughts. One thing about in the discussion I really liked was when you guys were talking about thinking about AI as almost the fourth layer in software architecture. And I think that's a really interesting way to frame it in this layer structure where if AI sits on top of data, it's the real challenge isn't, making sure AI itself has the integrity, but making sure the data underneath it kind of does and all the layers underneath it. And I think that's a really interesting way to frame it and help people understand what all goes into AI as well. And it also aligns with the conversation about vendor lock-in and ERP companies controlling data access then as well. But a question I have with this is, should AI capabilities be decoupled from ERP systems to avoid further dependency?
Yeah, that was kind of an undercurrent or a common theme of questions we were getting from the audience too around that. And Khalid did a nice job of talking through that. And I still struggle with it, honestly, because I think he was, from what I gather, Khalid was sort of leaning towards the don't rely on ERP systems to provide your AI capabilities. I think he was more along that school of thought. But I still struggle with the fact that, the vendors do have, as much as I hate the idea of vendor lock-in, which is a real issue, which is a real problem in the industry already. But the counter to that is that these big tech vendors, I think, are in a good position to have smarter and better trained AI models and LLMs and whatnot, because they've got the economies of scale. They've got the benefit of scale of having so many companies use their product. If you think about a company like, I know we talked about SAP in the interview, but another one is NetSuite. NetSuite has so many small and mid-market customers out there that are using their cloud native system and collecting all this data over years and years. NetSuite has a distinct advantage if they can get use of all that data that's been housed in their cloud-based ERP system for decades now. They're at a significant advantage as it relates to having better trained and more robust AI capabilities. But if you rely on a NetSuite to do all this AI stuff, and now you're even more dependent on them than you already were, is that a good thing? I don't know that it is, because now with cloud and SaaS, it's already increasing the switching costs pretty significantly to where it's really hard to get out of a cloud contract, and it's really hard to get out of your cloud system to move to another cloud system. I think the day of reckoning is still on the horizon, where companies realize, wow, I want to switch systems, but this is really hard. I mean, it's more difficult than it was to switch in the on-prem model. It's even more difficult now. And then if you throw AI now on top of that and say, not only that, but now all my AI stuff, all my data, all my IP, all the knowledge that I've trained this AI tool on for the last, let's say 10 or 20 years, if we fast forward to the future, imagine how hard that's going to be. So now all of a sudden you're sort of sort of stuck, or at the very least, it makes your next digital transformation that much riskier, that much more costly, that much in doubt, and that much more painful. So I don't know. I think the next 5 to 10 years are going to be really interesting as these companies start to realize, wow, I want to switch systems, but it's in the cloud. All my data is in the cloud. All the AI stuff is tied up with this one vendor. How the hell am I going to get out of this? So I don't know. I think it's going to be, I'm curious to see where it goes. I think those are two really big risks that companies have to assess, and they're two very conflicting risks that they've got to balance out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this kind of what you said kind of plays into, I guess, my next question about this too, which is, what should companies ask vendors about AI? And if you were advising a company on selecting an ERP with AI capabilities, what are the top 3 questions they should ask a vendor before signing a contract?
Well, there's a lot of legal type stuff that you'd want to work out as far as who owns the data and IP issues and things like that. In fact, we'll have, I mentioned in the interview with Khalid, I'll mention it again, we're going to have Marcus Harris, who's a software attorney and an IP attorney. He's going to be on this podcast in 2 weeks. So 2 episodes from today, he'll be on to talk about that exact topic. So I do want to get his take on that, because it's changing so quickly, and there's so much that has yet to be worked through the legal systems throughout the world that I think this will take years or decades to resolve, as far as who owns the data, what happens when, for example, you take your company confidential data and you put it into an AI model to help train it. And maybe that you've got 2 issues there. What happens if something happens to that data in terms of data security? But the second part of it is, now you've taught this AI model some lessons, and it's built this IP that's partially based on your data that you provided. So who owns that IP? And I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know if the legal system has really sorted that out either. And that's something I'll ask Marcus when he's on here in a couple of weeks. But those are some of the things you've got to think about. I'm not an attorney, and I would be a terrible attorney, so I'm not going to try to pretend to have the answer to that, but I will be curious to see what Marcus has to say on that in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. But it was an overall great conversation with Khalid. I feel like he had a lot of great insights, and I'm excited to hear how his book is.
Yeah, I ordered it. It should be here on I think in 3 days it'll be here. From what I recall, it's coming straight to the office. So we'll have to do a review of it or something, and really put Khalid on the spot, because he doesn't like attention. He's very humble. So I think I might have embarrassed him a little bit by not planning that and not telling him that I was going to pull up his book like that. But I didn't realize it was already out and published and getting good reviews and selling pretty well on Amazon. So wanted to make sure to share that with the audience. But we'll include in the link, or in the links below, we'll include a link to Khalid's book as well. And of course, be sure to check out our guide to AI strategy and implementation, which you can download for free on our website. That might be a good starting point as well. Another good reference point for you if you're trying to figure out how to navigate this whole AI thing. So be sure to check that on our website, and we'll include the links to that guide to AI strategy below as well. So we're going to play you a case study. It's actually a clip from my YouTube channel where I talk about the Matrix ERP project, which is the UK government's modernization attempt with their IT systems within the government. And we're going to talk about some of the information we've seen in public records that suggest that this project might be in trouble and might have a lot of risk affiliated with it. So let's roll the clip, and we'll come back and debrief and talk a little bit more about it. So in this diverse background and experience we have, being tech agnostic, we know what causes projects to fail, and we know when we see red flags, which ones are going to lead to failure. And so what I want to do today is talk about a case study involving the UK government and their massive ERP project that they're calling the Matrix project. It's a $150 million budget. It's a 10-year project. And I'm going to explain here in today's video why I think this project is doomed. But more importantly, I also want to talk about what this team or any team could do to overcome some of the challenges that are inherent in this type of project. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent, technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation, and you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey. Now let's jump back into today's content. So let's talk about what the Matrix ERP project is. What the project is essentially the UK government's attempt to consolidate different departments into a single ERP system. There are 9 different departments that are in scope. There's also 20 arm's length agencies that are involved as well in scope. And they're using 15 different systems across these different departments, and they're trying to consolidate down to one system and one platform. And this fragmentation of systems leads to siloed processes, siloed systems, and siloed data. But what's even more interesting about this case is the 9 major agencies that are in scope for this implementation. There are diverse agencies such as the Treasury Department. There's also the Department of Health and Social Services. There's also the Cabinet Office and the Department for Education. Those are just a few examples. And the reason I bring this up is because those are very different agencies within the overall UK government with very different missions, with very different sets of business processes, I would presume, and very different priorities. So we're going to come back to this point here in a moment and how that affects the likelihood of success or failure in this project, but that's a little bit about the scope of this project. Now, the UK government has defined a few different objectives of what they want to accomplish with this ERP project. First is standardization. They want to standardize their system, but also their business processes to ensure interoperability across the different agencies. The government also wants to reduce costs and increase efficiency. And by moving to a centralized single solution, the hypothesis is they will save money and they'll be more efficient because they're only maintaining one system, they're only maintaining one set of business processes, and it will reduce a lot of the different silos and interoperability issues they're having with their current technology stack. The government's also looking for better decision making. They want to have better information and better visibility to information so that they can make better and faster decisions. Now, in terms of how they plan to accomplish these objectives, they did an extensive, exhaustive RFP process, and they ultimately ended up choosing Workday, the HCM platform, Human Capital Management platform, as their chosen single platform, along with Cognizant as their system integrator. And this is planned right now to be a 10-year project, a 10-year contract for the software subscription, but also a 5 to 7 year implementation duration of Workday across 9 different agencies, including 20 additional arm's length agencies. So far, this may not sound like a failure waiting to happen, but in the next segment, I'm going to talk about some of the big challenges and risks that are inherent in this type of project. So why do I think this project is doomed, and why do I think this is an extremely risky ERP implementation? That's what I want to talk about here in this segment, and there's a few different reasons why I think this. First and foremost, this is a complex undertaking. Anytime you're implementing new technology within a government entity, there's a lot of complexity because not only are government entities typically pretty large and complex by definition, but typically there's politics involved because they're government entities designed to have a very specific mission. And also government entities, generally speaking, are slower to change. They resist change, and oftentimes they can't change because of regulatory concerns. But regardless of the cause, the issue here is that the government agency, the UK government, is very complex, and that alone escalates the risk profile of this project. To add to that, the scope of this project is also concerning because the scope is so broad and so diverse that it's difficult to understand or see how a product, even one as good as Workday, is going to be able to satisfy all the needs of these different diverse agencies. And not only that, but you think, how are they going to deploy a single platform across very different entities? It's almost like trying to deploy the same instance of a product to different companies in different industries. That's essentially what we're seeing here with this implementation. And the fact that you have 9 major agencies that have their own systems, their own way of working, now you're going to force them into one common way of working. That's a pretty big deal, especially when they have their own tailored systems that are tailored to meet their specific needs. That's just going to make the implementation that much more difficult. So this project will inherently have tension between the way things have always been done and the standardized common business processes that the UK government is looking for. Another reason why this is going to be a very risky undertaking is because of data migration. When you have 9 different agencies with different systems and different data sources, that's just a lot of data to clean up to consolidate and to map to a single system. We also have to look at change management. When you're dealing with tenured people that have been with an organization for a long period of time, and when you have an organization that's as mature and as well established as the UK government, which has been around for a long time, it's going to be that much more difficult to change the people within that organization, which means change management is going to be a lot more difficult than the average ERP implementation. And another secondary risk that isn't as major as some of the other ones I've talked about, but still worth noting, is the fact that right now the company is doing a massive overhaul of their technologies. In other words, what I'm trying to say is there's a bunch of different systems they're using now, and Workday is not used by a majority of the organization. The government is very heavily invested in Oracle and Microsoft, from what I understand, and they're moving from these platforms to a completely different one in Workday. Now, obviously, it's going to be difficult no matter what, but oftentimes what we see is organizations will at least pick one of the systems that has critical mass within the organization, but in this case, they've chosen a different system that's not in widespread use within the UK government. So that will be a big challenge and risk point as well. Another challenge that is going to cause disruption potentially to this project, which is similar to a point I made earlier, but a little bit different, worth calling out separately, is that getting executive sponsorship and alignment and buy-in across the entire UK government sounds overwhelming. It sounds like something that may not be achievable. And the reason I say that is if you think about 9 major agencies with 9 different leaders, 9 very different ways of operating, who's ultimately going to be the arbitrator of what's right and wrong or what's good or bad for the UK government? So you think about 9 different groups trying to come together to decide what that common business process and platform is going to look like. Who's most important? Who's going to be the ultimate decision maker, the tiebreaker as you go through this process? So that's going to be another really big challenge. And again, in a politically charged organization like any government entity, that's going to be something that is going to be very difficult to overcome and will likely significantly add to the time and cost associated with the overall implementation. So we talked about some of the risks we see in this project and some of the reasons why I think this is going to be a very difficult project and why I think there's a high likelihood of failure. But let's talk about what this team can do to overcome those challenges and potentially be successful. And these are also the same lessons, by the way, I would give to you or any other digital transformation team out there, especially if you're in a diverse, highly complex organization, in one that is very well established and mature and slow to change and maybe risk adverse. Especially in those cases, these same prescriptive recommendations are going to apply to you as well. First, let's start with executive support. The governance, the overall decision-making, and the executive buy-in support, that whole bucket of governance and sponsorship is going to be hugely critical to this project. In fact, I would argue that this is probably something that the UK government has underinvested in, and I would question whether or not they've actually accomplished this level of support that's going to be required to make the project successful. I mentioned before in this video how important it is to have clear decision-making criteria and clear prioritization of who wins if there's a disagreement on what that common business process and tool set should look like. And if you don't have that in place, it's going to be a very long project. It's going to be a very difficult project, more so than it already will be. So having that level of executive sponsorship, buy-in, and overall governance is going to be extremely critical. Communication is going to be really important, not only because this is a big, massive entity in the UK government, but also because there's so much change that's likely to happen that communication and change management is going to be extremely important to the success of this project. Training is going to be a lot more complex, and you're going to have to spend a lot more time training your employees, so that's something that this project team is going to have to invest heavily in, and perhaps even more heavily than they're already planning. And flexibility is something that needs to be considered as well. It's one thing to say that we're going to move to one single set of business processes, but the reality is most organizations can't do that. It's not realistic to do that. And I would say it's probably especially true in this project because of what I mentioned before around the diversity of the different agencies and processes that support those agencies. So knowing when to be flexible and knowing when to back down or back off of that goal of standardization is something that's very important. And also it's important to bifurcate between your business processes. Identify the ones that are most important to standardize, and then set aside those that maybe are okay to remain decentralized or flexible or different between different agencies. Usually it's not an either-or answer, yet we as humans are looking for an either-or answer. So what we need to do during the implementation planning phase of this project is ensure that we have agreement and consensus on what we're going to standardize and where we're going to allow flexibility. And then finally, I'd say having a realistic implementation plan and budget is going to be hugely critical. Even with a 5 to 7 year duration, I would bet money that that project is not going to finish in 5 to 7 years, simply because of the scope, the size, the magnitude, the diversity of the project, the fact that it's in the government space. All those things lead me to think that this is probably not going to be finished in 5 to 7 years. So one thing I'd recommend to this team is to be sure you lay out a realistic plan, make sure you fill in the gaps of the things that might be missing from Cognizant's RFP response, because Cognizant is there to design, build, and deploy Workday, and chances are pretty high that Cognizant is not responsible for some of the non-technical aspects of the project, things like the overall program management, the data migration, the architecture and integration to third-party systems, the overall organizational change management beyond just basic user training. So those are some of the things you've got to think about, is make sure that the project plan is complete and make sure that it's realistic so that we're not betting on something that's not realistic to begin with. So that was a clip from my YouTube channel where I talk about the Matrix ERP project and some of the troubles and red flags that I think it is facing. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that, Darian?
Yeah, I want to just start with how you started the video. You started the video by saying that spending $150 million on an ERP implementation would seem like a guaranteed success. But like you pointed out, the UK government's this project is facing major red flags. One question I have is, from your experience, what are the most common misconceptions that lead organizations to think that a big budget means lower risk?
Well, I think part of it is what we talked about earlier in this episode when we were talking about the big consulting firms and the big brand names. I think there's a false perception that you're sort of assured success if you hire one of these big consulting firms. But really, the only thing you're assured is that it's going to be a huge price tag. So you're guaranteed to have a huge price tag with very little assurance that the project's going to be successful, even though the perception is, maybe it has a higher likelihood of succeeding. Although I will say, another interesting dynamic is it's almost like CIOs and other leaders within organizations think, well, if this thing's going to fail and go down in flames, I don't want it to be blamed on me for choosing a consulting partner that no one's ever heard of. So I think for some reason it's kind of a weird, twisted way of thinking about it, but it's reality, and it's the way humans in organizations act. They think, well, if this whole thing is going to go down in flames, at least I can say I hired IBM or Accenture or Deloitte or whoever to handle it, and that wasn't the problem. When in fact that is oftentimes part of the problem, is you hired one of these big consulting firms and they took control of and hijacked your project and ran away with your checkbook and had very little business value to show for it. So I think that's kind of the thing that these big companies and these big organizations in the government and in the private sector need to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another thing you talked about was just the diverse of these agencies and how diverse these agencies are, from treasury to health, education, and more, with all the different missions and processes that they're looking for. Is there another example of a public sector project where this kind of a complexity was handled successfully? And what lessons could this project maybe take from that project?
Yeah, I mean, so at third stage, we do quite a bit of government work. It's not all we do. We do mostly private sector work, but we do have quite a few client engagements in the government and public sector. But most of that is going to be at the city level. So in the U.S., for example, you've got federal, and I know you know this, Darian, but this is more for our international audience that may not fully understand how the U.S. government is structured. But you've got federal, which is like the nationwide government, and then you've got the state governments, and then you've got the city governments. So city governments are the smaller of the three tiers, if you will. And those organizations, we've seen a lot of success in that space. We've actually been pretty gun shy about moving too far into state and especially federal projects because of the complexity and the risk and just some of honestly, the bad decision-making that happens at that level. So we haven't gotten too entrenched in that space yet. I think there's a lot of value we can provide, especially in terms of quality assurance and helping manage some of these big system integrators. But, the big federal bureaucracies and the big private and public sector organizations out there tend to have this bias towards these big consulting firms, and they seem to think that they're going to solve all the world's problems when in fact they won't. And oftentimes, more often than not, they're making the problems worse. So to answer your question, yes, I've seen successes, but it's been at the smaller, I'd say the city level or the smaller government entity level. Internationally, when we work with government entities outside the U.S., We've been more successful and seen more success at the smaller level. I'm not saying the federal and the big, massive, complex organizations like the entire UK government, for example, I'm not saying they can't be successful, but the odds of them succeeding are a lot lower than if any one of those 20 agencies would just go off on their own and do their own implementation, which honestly, that might be a better answer for them. I'm not involved with the UK federal or the UK government, but I would suspect that if you want to have a higher chance of success, you would probably, even if it meant some redundant cost, you probably have less risk to just implement different systems and different projects at each of those agency levels rather than trying to do it across the entire thing. Because the government entities, let's be honest, government entities are very slow to change. In many cases, they can't change for whatever reason because of politics and regulatory stuff. So to put in one common platform that automates and standardizes, creates a common business process across all those agencies, I just don't think that's realistic.
Right. That was actually kind of what my next question was, in a way of, do you think Workday was the right choice for this project? Or maybe Workday is only right for a few different agencies within the government, and maybe a different system would fit better. So I guess you kind of answered that question more, but do you think there's another platform that potentially would fit better, I guess?
Yeah, I don't even know that it's an issue with Workday. Even if, let's just say Workday were the right answer. Let's just say it's a better answer than anything else that's out there. Let's just assume that's true. I'm not saying it is, but let's just say that's true. If that's true, I would still say you might be better off spinning up 20 different Workday implementations across the UK government than you would be trying to do one big, massive Workday implementation. And I know that sounds counterintuitive and it sounds wasteful and it sounds redundant. And why would you do that when you can have one system, one instance of that system doing everything? I just don't think it's realistic the UK government is not a small entity. There's a lot of people, a lot of diverse functions and processes. It just, even if Workday can handle everything they need, implementing it in a way that's common across all those different agencies, I just don't think is the right strategy. I have trouble seeing how that makes sense or how that could possibly be successful or a sound strategy long-term.
Yeah. And I guess a question off of that, do you think it's going to be more costly for them to try and do all of this across the board, rather than would it cost more money up front maybe to separate it out? What do you think is the reasoning for not separating it out that they're having right now?
I think it's because it sounds good in theory. And I think this, and I don't know this for a fact, so this is pure speculation. So if you work for Workday's legal counsel, don't sue me. But when I speculate on this would be that Workday and whoever sold them, Workday probably sold them on this vision that our product can give you standard processes, which is probably, it is true. Workday can absolutely do what the UK government wants to do. So I'm not questioning Workday actually at all in this. I'm not saying Workday is perfect either, but I'm not questioning Workday, but I'm just questioning whether or not the government of the UK recognizes the fact that yes, Workday potentially sold them this vision. Yes, Workday can probably deliver to that vision. But my big question, I'd say 99% of my question is, can the government handle that? And can the government really adapt to one rollout of Workday? And and it doesn't matter this Workday. You could put any product name in there and I'd have the same response. I just don't think that they can. I just don't see how politically and organizationally and in terms of complexity, I just don't see how they possibly could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a project we'll have to keep our eye on over the next few years and months.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll be curious to see how it unfolds. And that'd be awesome if I was wrong. So if I'm wrong, that'll be really cool. And it'd be cool to come back and say, guess what? I was wrong. And here's why they succeeded. And here's what they did different to, do things to avoid, the common pitfalls that we see so many government agencies fall into. So good stuff. Well, great. Well, thanks for that. Great questions there. And thanks for another great episode, Darian, and thanks to the audience for the great questions. Thanks to Khalid Morris for being here and being our special guest here today. New episodes every Wednesday. Check out transformationgroundcontrol.com if you'd like to see all the past episodes. All past 211 episodes you can find right there at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also subscribe to it on whichever platform you prefer by going to that same website. Check us out on social media as well. We'll see you next week and hope you all have a great week in the meantime. Take care.